Well, that was torturous this episode. Episode 5, Season 2/episode 12 of Interview with the Vampire, in which we go back to the 70s to get the real tea on what happened in that first interview. It's pretty much all set in one location, giving it a play-like feel. And we certainly get some strong performances because of it. I think this will probably be one of the standout episodes of this season. I like it. It sets up a new alliance between Daniel and Louis versus Armand, who seems to be hiding more. Let's get into that breakdown. Spoilers are coming. Let's get to it. So we begin with Louis and Armand reminiscing about the good old times. He uses the impersonal pronoun one. He says, "Funny thing trying to remember what occupied one's time when one was ignorant of the plotting around him." He's referring to Santiago and the rest of his minions plotting to reveal Luis and Claudia's secret. We saw the setup for that last time, but instead of using I, he uses one, which Daniel makes note of, explaining that it indicates that he's distancing himself from something or avoid a touchy subject for him, which I think is about what happens to Claudia. But Armand pushes it aside, saying that, oh, the sun's coming up, Louis is just getting sleepy. Just as his lunch arrives, Malik. Here's another example of some good casting for just a little role here. Malik really comes off as an asshole here. A dumb one who answered Armand's ad to race him because Armand wants to hunt his food. I guess that's how he gets his workout in. Louis notes that these victims are usually bad people with bad professions, like being an arms dealer. And if they can't find someone like that, then they'll go for someone who's interested in an easeful death. Perhaps a junkie type? Anyway, so now that they're all alone, Daniel takes this opportunity to change the subject back to the first interview from the 70s. He wants to fill in some holes. Daniel's curious about why Armand saved him from Louis, who ended the first interview by biting into Daniel's neck. Louis repeats what surely Armand has fed him, that he knew that Louis liked Daniel and kept him alive to preserve his happiness, and that he had a hunch that Daniel would prove useful in the future. But Daniel wants more clarity. As we go back in time, he's got to show him the coffin, of course. Climb in, close the lid, and bang. He sure did bang Lestat that one time in season 1 when they climbed into the coffin together. Hold your horses, Daniel. We gotta get to that interview first. Louis offers some fun treats in this backgammon set. All the drugs you could ever wish for as a dope fiend like Daniel. So we're establishing here that Daniel is a party boy. Pretty reliant on drugs if not addicted. So his judgment's off. He's not the best interviewer. But Louise sees something in him. Young Daniel here is like, well, I guess I'll return the favor with some skin. Takes off his shirt to Louis' surprise. Louis just wants a good interview. He doesn't want any sex at the moment. So we get the answer that no, they didn't fuck. This episode seems to kind of blur Daniel's sexual orientation a bit. I think in the first season, Daniel's excuse for hanging out in the gay scene in San Francisco was for the drugs. But the impression I get from this episode is that Daniel is at least bisexual. Perhaps even leaning more towards women later in life, maybe for convenience sake. But doesn't really give Daniel a particular label. It can feel a little bit like Erasure, since in the books he has a strong relationship with Armand. But that can still be a thing, as we see in this episode. Armand is adept at wiping memories. A lot could have happened between the 70s and the present. So here Daniel doesn't buy yet that Louis is a vampire. He just wants to record, but he's fascinated by him, wants to know why Louis believes that he is a vampire. So Louis has to scare him, has to prove it. Like, look at this, I got these fangs, I got this vampire speed. And that does it. Daniel thinks perhaps he's the Zodiac Killer. What a reveal that would be, What if the Zodiac Killer was a vampire all along? Of course, the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer during this time period who was never caught. So now Daniel's scared shitless. Back in the present, Daniel wants to go deeper though, calling this first interview emotional upchuck. He didn't have to do much journalism. He was just unloading all his feelings and constructing a particular narrative, I guess. You can see how Louis like pretty performative here. He's insulting Lestat with flowery language, screaming it into the tape recorder, you know, so it doesn't really feel as authentic, you know, it feels more like he's embellishing for effect. Even though Louis praises Daniel for being pretty smart back then, Daniel's like, nah, I was a moron. He just wants to see those fangs. He was having too much fun with the drugs and the vampire aesthetic. He didn't realize the danger he was in, you know. As the night went on, Daniel rejected Louis' conclusions. He couldn't understand why Louis was feeling suicidal when Claudia left him in New Orleans. He feels like it was silly for Louis to even contemplate giving up on life and rejecting the dark gift he's been given. So here Louis realizes that Daniel missed the point of his story and the horror and tragedy of being a vampire. Daniel asks to be bitten here. He says he could be his Lestat, his Claudia, even better. Daniel's young and naive here, but he's also all drugged up. But it still angers Louis, of course. I think really the main reason for him telling the story back then was to get some sympathy. And then here Daniel completely rejects that. So Louis bites him. In the present, Daniel's almost on the side of Louis, feeling like his young, stupid self deserved it. Louis knows that because Daniel was hyped up on all those drugs, he absorbed all those drugs too, thinking perhaps that's why he didn't remember what happened after. But Daniel wants to know what happens next. So he reveals that he has a recording of that interview still. In season 1, we saw that he burned the tapes. Of course, these files are what the Talamasca had kept and gave to Daniel. But he tells Louis that, oh, he just had a backup in the cloud that he forgot about. And he says that his assistant enhanced the audio to pick up Armand coming in for the rescue. And now that's starting to pique Louis' interest a bit, like, what did happen after this exactly? So now we get to the juicy parts of this episode. This is what happened after the tape ran out. Louis and Armand have a little bit of a verbal fight here. Guess what? It's daytime. Armand's enraged. He has to clean up after Louis once again. Louis calls him boring. I really recommend going back to this scene if you missed some of these insults. A lot of the lines are overlapping. You might get a laugh or two from some of these roasts. He called Armand the softest, beigest pillow. I read some comment comparing this to Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. There's like a big scene in there where the married couple has this back and forth. It's a play first and adapted to a movie, but classic Elizabeth Taylor performance. The main sticking point here, though, is Louis' continued obsession with Lestat. Even though he says he insults him a lot in the interview, he still can't stop talking about him. And then Armand brings up Claudia, saying that she didn't love Louis, which I think is a bit of a stretch, but it does hurt Louis hearing that, and he does agree. You know, this leads him into a downward spiral of depression, feeling guilty about his time with Claudia. Now, earlier on, Daniel suspected that Claudia was no longer with us because Louis kept referring to her in the past tense. But he says he hears her voice. Could this be a hallucination like he envisions Lestat? Maybe Claudia's out there. Or he just wants to join her in oblivion because he goes outside. He steps into the sunlight. He now remembers, like, shit, he went to kill himself. Now, this is a very heavy moment for him, of course. His fight with Armand really dug up a lot of these emotions, a lot of these suicidal thoughts, and mixed with all the drugs in his blood from feeding on Daniel, that all led to him seeking some release via the sun burning him. But Armand is there to save him, grabs him, brings him back in. Now, I guess we're meant to understand that because Armand is an older vampire, he's more powerful, he can withstand the sunlight better. And also, when he came into the apartment, it was daytime outside already, right? So he must have walked there in daylight? Or maybe there's a secret passage or something? But if you know the actual details of that, let me know in the comments. And so then Louis gets crispy and is bedridden. As these memories start flooding in, you can see his teary eyes. They're bloody tears. Yeah, so moving forward, the rest of this episode, like, this is going to be some of Asad Zaman's best acting. He's really demonstrating why he's such a good Armand. Just the range of his performance in this episode is so good. Louis says, I'm sorry, but it's meaningless words to Armand here. He has this gentle sadism to him, torturing poor Daniel to upset Louis. in a sequel to that cartoon where that little dog is having like some coffee and his apartment is on fire and he's like, this is fine, everything's fine.
This is fine, we're all fine.
Another thing that's interesting about this scene and how it's edited is that it's demonstrating the fallibility of memory once more. It repeats the scene, but this time Armand reveals the identity of that corpse we keep seeing. It was the neighbor who saw Louis burn himself in the sun. Armand had to chase him down and kill him. That's another thing Armand's doing for Louis, thing after thing. So at this point, Louis and Daniel are trying to dig deep here, real deep, trying to remember as much as they can about what exactly happened. Armand is in a very bitter mood, and he wants to figure out exactly what makes Daniel so special, so interesting. Here's a cool visual that I actually missed the first time I watched this. He's unspooling these cassettes, but he's also using his mind to unravel the tapes on the counter as well, not just the one in his hands. A pretty cool little effect. One of Daniel's answers to the question, why is he fascinating, is he's good at interviewing people, he's good at getting people to open up. But in the first interview, Louis was more like crafting his own narrative. He didn't necessarily want somebody to really get at his truth. Maybe it's not that complicated, you know. Louis just wanted somebody to tell a story to, and he had a tape recorder. He fit the bill at that moment. So now we'll see some of the bits we saw earlier in the season. The thing about the Playboy magazines he sold at school, the paper bag he put over a girl's head. Before I thought it had something to do with him hiding his sexuality. But no, these are just like little weird things that he's done. Armand just thinks these transgressions are boring or ordinary. Nothing too special. Daniel feels like he's just toying with him. He says, oh, you're the fast anyone, you can read minds. You're not boring. So then Armand's like, well, I'll tell you my story. So he gives him just a little bit, but he immediately seems to regret it. I feel it's because he just doesn't see Daniel as worth it, you know? That's not for him. He doesn't really want to tell his story. Then later, Daniel remembers that Armand was muttering something. In season 1, there was a scene of him praying, but it's not clear if that was just part of his disguise. I wonder if they'll get into this more. They move on to the library with the Japanese-inspired landscaping to try to remember more. For a moment, Daniel tries to escape, but from the other room, Armand just says rest, and he hits his nose. And there's no escape, poor Daniel. So Armand brings Louis to the coffin to help him heal faster, because I guess there's less light that could leak in once he's in the coffin. He gives him some of his own blood to heal up as well. Armand wonders if Louis tried to communicate with Lestat through this interview, thinking that Lestat will find the interview in a bookstore, and then we'll go find Louis because of it. Armand uses some more flowery wording as usual. Armand tells Louis that if he wanted to escape this prison of empathy he made for him, he could have just asked. So it seems like he's almost kind of ready to break up with Louis here, right? And he says he'll do one last service for him, and he uses his mind power to give Lestat a call. And Lestat responds. Lestat seems concerned, but to what extent really? Because presumably he hasn't made an effort at all to contact Louis this whole time. And he says, I love you. Though Armand cannot repeat it. Armand can't bring himself to relay that message. Armand, I think, rightly believes that those words wouldn't be helpful for Louis. He fears that will lure Louis back to Lestat. Though Louis doesn't respond at all to Lestat. Maybe Armand is a little bit too protective. Maybe Louis wouldn't really believe those words from Lestat, the I love you words. Because he says Lestat was just his maker, nothing else. It would appear that at this point Louis has in fact moved on from Lestat. But Armand is worried that he's going to have to be on suicide watch for another 1,000 years. He questions whether Louis has forgiven him for what happened in Paris. Louis doesn't say anything to that, so it looks like Louis maybe still holds some resentment towards Armand for that. And so he tells him to rest. The dark, somber, yet beautiful scenes continue, with Armand now trying to ease Daniel into death. He's playing the role of death right now. It's even a gentler version of the mesmerism we saw Santiago do in the Theater of the Vampires. But it's still pretty brutal. He's telling Daniel that he's not going to amount to much. He's going to have a boring life with a boring, vacant family. He won't be a good reporter, so it might as well just die now. Just give up on the drudgery of life. Daniel tries to defend himself for a bit, but he's no match for Armand. And about here's a moment where Daniel lets go and accepts his end. Oh, how sweet. Chomp. And then this time Louis comes in to save Daniel. Damn, Daniel can't catch that sweet release of death. There's always a vampire trying to be a savior here. It's like Daniel can be this living memento of their love, a remembrance of this moment. A testament to our companionship, he says, of its endurance. Perhaps he already has it in mind to return to Daniel later on to continue or finish the interview. And Armand calls him master, you know. He asks if this is an order or not, and it seems to be. So I guess Louis is still in the power position since last episode, that sequence on the bench, but it could also be that Armand is playing the role of the submissive here. He does have this mind control ability that we're going to see coming up here. And Louis calls him Auron, which is the name he had before he became a vampire, right? They're at least role-playing that dynamic from Armand's past. And so Louis says some inspiring words to Daniel, but Daniel remembers that he thought he was writing something some junkie told him, but he conflated the incident and it was actually Louis who told him this. Louis basically told him the opposite of what Armand said. Tells him he's a good reporter with a point of view, and it seemed to work because even though he ruined his marriages and his relationship with his daughters, he stayed a reporter, became pretty successful. Then we see Armand using his powers to rearrange Daniel's memories, erase everything that happened after he got bitten by Louis. They take him to a drug den and they move on, which makes sense to Daniel in the future here, but he wonders why Louis couldn't remember it all. Louis suspects it was just because, he went out and got burnt in the sun, he was healing, probably lost his memory because of that. But Daniel says it was precise at the exact moment, suggesting that there was more to it, that Armand wiped Louis' mind as well, which is a pretty big betrayal from your significant other. What exactly is Armand hiding? He returns, all happy after having a good meal, and so they tell him that they were talking about San Francisco, wondering why Armand saved Daniel. And Armand responds by regurgitating the same line Louis said earlier. He was preserving Louis' happiness, and thought that Daniel could prove useful in the future. What seemed like a satisfactory answer an hour ago is now put into question. Armand's motivations are put into question. And then here Armand realizes that they're not buying it. Maybe he's even reading their mind a bit right now. Louis definitely is angry. And then the episode ends before we get a more truthful response from Armand. Pretty captivating cliffhanger here, because now we have Louis and Daniel working together to try to solve this little mystery. So I assume next week we're going to get Armand's side of the story, This could be the moment that ends Louis and Armand's relationship. Armand doesn't have that impulsive violence that Lestat has. He's more subtle in his manipulation. He's more methodical. And he seems to be justifying any wrongdoings with the idea that he's just trying to protect Louis. But mind wiping is pretty intrusive and does cross a line. So I do wonder how much more time they're going to spend on this little development here. We have 3 more episodes, so I think they do have some time to cover it all. But yeah, that was a good episode. Really showcased everyone's acting, and the writing was really good. It finally gave us more insight of all those flashbacks we were seeing. And yet there's still a lot more questions. Anyway, the season just keeps getting better and better, I think. But that will have to do it for now. I appreciate everybody that watches. I appreciate all the likes and the comments and the subscriptions and all that YouTube stuff. I'll be back next week. I'll see you next time under the moonlight. Bye bye.